Howdy, Samurai Spirit here. You know, I've been writing manga for over a year now, and one of the most valuable lessons that I've learned is to study the manga that I read and try to analyze how the mangaka behind it utilized story structure to create a well-flowing story. I've done this with a few of my favorites, but something I've found frustrating as a young writer is that it's been tough to find any sources online with people breaking down manga in this way and showing exactly where the story beats take place. So today I've decided to take a look at the first chapter of one of my favorite manga, My Hero Academia, and show you how its author, Kohei Horikoshi, conformed his story to the common manga storytelling format known as Kishōtenketsu. Now, whether he did this actively or just naturally conformed to Kishōtenketsu by knowing how to tell good stories doesn't really matter. The point is that your stories should look something like this when they're done. And in case you don't know, Kishōtenketsu is basically the Eastern storytelling equivalent to the 3-act structure that almost all Western stories utilize, and it's heavily used within most of, if not all, manga stories. It's essentially a 4-act structure which breaks down the Western second act into 2 parts. So with that out of the way, let's get started. Ki, or Introduction. Ki begins with our introduction to our protagonist, Deku, on page 1. It establishes the world of My Hero Academia as one where most people have superpowers, which they call quirks. We're shown how fights work, and we get to learn a bit more about Deku. We get to see that he wants to be a superhero, despite being born quirkless. And we see a bit of how the superhuman society works. Show, or Development. This phase starts when the story switches from telling us about events which happened in Deku's life previously to showing new ones happening in real time. The first of which is his confrontation with his classmate/bully Bakugo, who denigrates him for wanting to go to UA High School, a prestigious academy for heroes. The next major development comes when Deku is attacked by a slime monster on page 22, then rescued by his hero and role model All Might on page 24. Deku tags along with All Might, eventually witnessing his transformation into his true skeletal form, and the show phase comes to an end with All Might telling Deku that he doesn't think that someone without a quirk can become a hero on page 34. The show phase lasts for 25 pages, nearly half the length of the entire story. This is pretty normal, and it's what you should expect to see from your own stories as well. The bulk of any story lays in the development. It's a pretty important part of the story, and just make sure that you pay plenty of attention to it in this story, any story that you read, and of course, any story that you end up writing. Ten, or Twist. 10 phase begins with Deku's classmate Bakugo being attacked on page 36 by the same slime monster who previously attacked Deku. We get our twist after All Might, the strongest hero in the world, hesitates and doesn't get involved in the fight on page 39. But Deku, a quirkless dork, does decide to get involved and charges into the fight to save his friend on page 43. This is the climax of the story as Deku finally delivers on the promise of him wanting to become a hero that was established in the Ki phase. That's sort of the point of the climax, where we find out if the protagonist is going to get what they want. And though we don't know yet if society will ever accept Deku as being a hero, we know from his actions that he is a hero. Eventually All Might mans up and gets involved, ending the fight on page 49. Which brings us to Ketsu, or Resolution. The resolution phase begins on page 52 when All Might tracks down Deku after the fight to have a nice conversation with him, wrapping things up. It culminates on page 55, the last page of the chapter, with All Might changing his mind and telling Deku that he can, in fact, become a hero. So that's the Kishōtenketsu storytelling formula, at least as it appears in the first chapter of My Hero Academia. In the end, it worked out that about 15% of the story is spent in the introduction, 45% is spent in the development phase, 30% is on the twist, and only about 10% is left for the resolution. That's pretty much exactly how you want to do it. You want to get into the main story quickly, so you don't want to spend more than about 10 to 15% of the story on the introduction. You want the bulk of the story to fall within show, development. Then when you get to 10, your twist and climax phase, you want it to be longer than Ki or Ketsu, but you don't want it to be as long as the development phase. This is because 10 is meant to be the most exciting and hardest hitting part of the entire story. If it drags on for too long, then you start to lose some of that tension and impact. It only should last as long as it has to. The same goes for Ketsu, the resolution. You want to wrap things up pretty quickly, because the audience at this point knows that all the action is over, and they don't want you to waste their time. So put a nice little bow on it and finish the story. Horikoshi does a fantastic job of that here, as it's only 4 pages long and literally ends on the final page of the chapter. Well, that's all there is to say, I guess. If you're an aspiring manga or comics writer, make sure to pay attention to this breakdown. You can go back and read the first chapter of My Hero and use these page numbers to really read and see the changes and developments in the story and witness for yourself how it develops. I think that's the best way for a young writer to really learn about story structure, is to analyze the things that you read, and I hope that this guide has been helpful for you. Thanks for listening, and I hope I see you next time. Oh, and by the way, if you'd like to see me break down more manga later in the future into the Kishōtenketsu formula, I'd be glad to. Just let me know. All right, see you next time. Bye.